So the last video, I covered walking in a D&D campaign, and I promised a follow-up video on using animals, vehicles, ships, and other exotic forms of travel. So here I am with my first haircut in many months, and again, I'm approaching this situation from the GM perspective. So you're looking at the practical considerations of travel as it applies to the players, at a micro level of actually running the game, but also in a larger sense of how these forms of travel affect a society in a D&D world. And we really see these implications when we look at the exciting world of assisted travel. Hello again, KR King here to help one and all homebrew their own D&D campaign. So a quick review of the last video in terms of the four kind of criteria that I gave for evaluating travel. Now these were the speed of the travel, the carrying capacity of that mode of travel, the use of resources with that form of travel, and then finally the terrain effects on various modes of travel. So now we're going to move from purely walking, as I said, I think the most common form of travel in a D&D campaign, to assisted travel, whether that's using, animals, carts, or other devices to propel the players through the world. So a quick point of order in terms of movement rates. I covered this last time in terms of walking. I said you could go 24 miles a day in an 8-hour day, basically 3 miles an hour. You can go farther than that if you go 9 or 10 or whatever, but then you have exhaustion rates as detailed in the books. I said this was non-difficult terrain. I should have mentioned that if you're going on a paved road or a path, you can alter these movement rates, because here you're not really looking, how can I, where am I going here? What am I doing here? Trying to avoid things. You're just going down a road or even a path. You can decide how you want to do that. What I tend to do, a path might be an eighth a move extra a day, a half a hex a day, which can accumulate over days. And for a paved road, you could get, anywhere from a quarter, which would be an extra hex a day. And I bring that up also when you're creating a map. You're going to be thinking about, people are going to create their towns and villages, settlements, keeps and fortresses based on how far people can move every day. So if you've got a paved road going from one settlement to another, you're going to think about that in terms of a day's movement, because people don't move at night. It's dangerous. You can't see. It's very dark in a medieval world at night. All right, so now we're moving away from walking to assisted travel. And in a medieval D&D setting, when we think of assisted travel, we usually think of animals, either riding horses or having pack animals, that are walking with us and carrying things, or they're pulling carts or wagons. All right, so if we think about animals without carts, you have the mounted party, and you have the party that's just using pack animals that are walking with them. A mounted party can be horses, ponies. They can be all sorts of exotic. I've seen llamas, depending on the terrain. We'll talk about that. But the idea here with a mounted party is obviously you have a faster movement rate. You have greater carrying capacity. With pack animals, you could have a large carrying capacity, but then you don't get the increase in movement. You need resources to use animals. You've got to feed them and take care of them. And then there are terrain types in which it is not realistic to take horses or animals that are assisting you in your travel. So the idea of riding animals is, in some sense, they either give you more speed to travel just by their pure movement rate, or by the sureness that they provide over a certain terrain type. Say camels in the desert. And in fact, if you're just riding a horse at a normal rate of speed, you have a 4 movement per hour instead of the 3 that you get walking. And horses can gallop. Well, they can go for an hour, and they give you twice that fast movement. They can go 8 miles in an hour. The thing is, after they've galloped for an hour, horses need to rest. And I would say a short rest, which is another hour. So it balances out, except that you have that ability to go those 8 miles in 1 hour, to get away from something or to chase someone down. And the thing to remember is virtually all the players in your world have grown up in a world where people use animals. They know that, yes, you can push horses, you can gallop for an hour. You can also run a horse to death. it has to rest. So you can adjust this for the other kind of exotic animals. You know, a camel you may say is the same as a horse. You may say faster, slower. You can look up, there's resources on the internet for this kind of thing. You know, if you have an exotic animal, let's say a war rhino, its movement might not be great, but in combat situations, its, you know, offensive capabilities might be tremendous. So when it comes to the care and feeding of animals in the field, you have to decide as a GM how detailed you want to make this. You know, you may say to yourself, I don't want to run an accounting game of keeping track of the feed and everything. I want to run a game with, you know, encounters and adventures and telling stories. You can just say as a rule of thumb, if the players have enough cash on them to pay for the animals or whatever they have, carts or whatever maintenance they have, you can just, you know, charge that at the end of months, you know, have a fee or something. Or you can just worry about this when the players move into an area where it's clear it's going to be difficult to find feed for the animals. And this gets into terrain effects when you're using animals, because not only is it going to be difficult, you know, in a desert for animals to find water or anything to eat, but it can be difficult for certain types to move. Horses are going to find desert difficult. Certainly Arctic conditions they're not going to like. And you can't really take them underground. Think of Sam's horse Bill in Lord of the Rings. They had to abandon him outside the mines of Moria. Supposedly he miraculously made it home. I wouldn't be so confident if you just let loose animals in a D&D world. So when you have difficult terrain, you can bring in other animals that the players can ride. You know, camels in the desert is an obvious example. You might have elephants in the jungle or big cats. And then as we'll talk about, you know, flying mounts when I talk about flying movement. So one of the things about having animals, whether you're mounted on them or they're pulling carts, is they are going to draw more attention to your group. You know, animals have smells, they make sounds. Creatures out in the wilderness are constantly hunting for food. You know, and they're going to see animals, you know, griffins is an obvious example with horses, but any kind of animals as potential food. And of course, when you have a mounted party, it changes the dynamics of combat, right? Are you going to stay on your horses? Are you going to dismount? And the thing is that you're always thinking about when you're running this is, where are the animals, right? What's going on? Where are you dismounting? Where are they going? All right, so the next thing with assisted travel is when you're using carts and wagons, which are being pulled typically by animals. You know, and this is a classic trope of D&D. Lower level characters will sign on as caravan guards, gives them a chance to travel, see a little bit of the world, but you can have all sorts of adventures with caravans or, you know, coaches. You know, the royal coach is transporting some important personage and the players are there as guards, and maybe, you know, the royal coach leaves with great fanfare, but the princess is actually in this simple cart that the players are guarding. Now, obviously, you have a resource drain in terms of purchasing carts, but maintaining them as well, they can break down. And the thing about this is carts have a limited terrain that they can go in. Obviously, paved roads, paths through non-difficult terrain, maybe some clear terrains or grasslands, coastal, but really it gets limited. But sometimes the players may be determined to take carts into more difficult terrain, say a hilly region where they want to dig out a collapsed mine and they need all sorts of digging equipment. And the reason they're going to be tempted is because carts and wagons provide the greatest carrying capacity of any land-based assisted travel. So you just want to warn them, hey, if you're going to go through these hills with these carts, there's a chance they could break down. And for that carrying capacity, they are going to attract attention. Obviously, bandits love to raid caravans because of all the booty they can find. And you can be creative with wagons, you know, creating a war wagon. You know, it can be bristling with weapons to warn anyone to stay away, or it can be a secret one in order to lure bandits out and, you know, eliminate them once and for all. So anytime you're traveling on the water, this means going in ships or boats. There's all sorts of definition of what separates them. I tend to think of boats as taking people across small bodies of water or rivers, you know, anything that you can row yourself, a canoe, that sort of thing. You know, and ships can go into the open ocean, although medieval ships, they tended to hug the coastline. But again, it's a fantasy world. You can have ships be anything you want. And boats are going to be relatively cheap in comparison to ships. Ships, not only is it very expensive to build them, maintain them, but they need sizable, skilled crews in order to operate. But there's a reason to build them, because ships have by far the most carrying capacity of any mode of travel in D&D. And for this reason, they are a worthy prize for pirates, or creatures, above and below the water, or rival shipping concerns. So I'm going to do a whole episode on sea encounters because I love, pirates and, underwater creatures and mermen and, storms and shipwrecks. Right now I'm just talking about the travel implications for your players. So anytime the players need to travel across a body of water, they may use some form of ship or boat. As I said, for a lake or river, you might have a ferry that's pulled across by ropes. If the players need to get to an island that's close by, they can use a boat if they're doing it surreptitiously for some kind of raid on an island castle. If they're going out into the open ocean, or they're traveling from a town to a town across a great body of water along the coast, then they may use a ship. And they can buy a ticket on this ship. Some players may have sailing experience. They can sort of sign on as a crew member. So there's a number of implications for this travel. The players can be going incognito, trying to hide their presence on board a ship or not. The other thing is, if you've got, a 3-4 day journey on a ship is like a tavern in that it takes in people from all over the place. And the players, if they interact with other passengers or crew on a ship, they can get all sorts of information. They can have encounters. They can also meet rivals. This can be a fertile ground for interesting things about a D&D campaign, is traveling on a ship. Now, it's very important to remember that unlike walking or on horseback or with your own carts, when you're on any kind of ship, you are under the control of the captain of that ship. Unless you own it, you are the captain, or you've hired them, they're going to leave when they want to leave, arrive when they want to arrive, go where they want to go. You are not in control of your movement, and you can't just get off. Even if you have information that says, hey, we should not go that way, if the captain says that's the way I'm going, you're stuck. And if you start to sow dissension among passengers and crew about where the ship is going, that's mutiny, and that's a capital offense, and you can get in big trouble. So we think of flying as a movement for a very short time period and duration for any player characters that don't have natural flying ability. So I've never run any player character races that have natural flyability. I know there are some, the Tiefling and some others. I've noticed the Adventurers League doesn't allow these, or at least they didn't before. You can decide if you want to have player characters that have natural fly abilities. You just have to think about the impact of that. They can fly up in the air to scout things. Maybe it reduces their chance of getting lost. They can also fly up to avoid combat with anything that can't fly, has to use ranged weapons. They can also get into combat, aerial combat, with creatures that can fly. It changes the game to have anyone in the party that has the natural fly ability. Druids can shape change starting at 8th level with a flying creature, but obviously they then take on the characteristics of the giant eagle or whatever. And with spells, you have concentration and time limits, which tends to make flying movement very tactical, very situational. You want to fly from point A to point B, a very short distance. You want to fly out of battle, something like that. You can have a magic item such, say, a flying carpet that can fly for much greater distances. Depending on its size, they carry anywhere from 200 to 800 pounds. Obviously, when they get larger like that, the movement goes down to, I think, 30 feet. But again, you could, in fact, use those to move around flying. You can also have flying mounts, Pegasi or Griffins or whatever you want. What I would say with these things is to be very careful using flying creatures, mounts, and flying carpet magic devices, and to warn the players about the implications of such travel. Because what is the great risk of flying for creatures that don't naturally fly? Falling, right? Falling is deadly, 1d6 per 10 feet. So think about it, 100 or 200 feet. I know the limit they say is 20d6. Well, roll that sometimes. Very deadly. And can you really make a reflex save falling 200 feet? You don't have much chance to practice that. And so if you're on a flying carpet, like say 3 people, and the person controlling it starts to make evasive maneuvers, do you fall off? I mean, how do you hold on? If you say, oh, well, the magic of the flying carpet keeps everybody on. Okay. But really? I mean, what are the winds? You go 1,000 feet in the air. What's the wind side? What's the temperature like up there? And if you're engaged in combat with something that is really experienced at this, maybe the flying mount that you have has a certain natural ability, but you're directing its thing. And again, always, if you get hit, whammed or something, and you fall, very nasty. Now, in the old days, a flying ship was a very rare thing. You saw it if the players happened to go to the astral plane or something like that. I'm noticing now more and more online. I ran in an online world where they had flying ships. Now, there are implications to this, and so I would tend to make these very rare if I'm going to use them at all on my material plane. If the skies are covered with flying ships, it's totally going to alter the way people travel and whatnot. The fights for the skies. If they're very rare, they're going to be coveted, not just by powerful NPCs and whatnot, but also there might be flying creatures, say dragons, that, resent the humans polluting the air with these ships. So again, you want to think about these implications and only use them very carefully. And then if you do use them, you see that the drawings tend to make them like galleons up in the air. They have some magic thing that makes them float, and then they use the winds to propel themselves. How fast is that? Or do you think of them like airships that move very slowly? Again, you have open decks. Are you going to have combat in which, ships come together like sea ships? Because if you're going to be boarding another ship, the risks are high if you happen to fall, right? You fall to your certain death. If an airship crashes, it's like a plane crash. Everybody's pretty much dead. I would make them rare. I would make them specialized, going to the astral plane or some very specific event. So then you have underwater movement, and almost always your player characters do not breathe underwater naturally. They need magical effects to both breathe and to move freely underwater. I've had some great undersea encounters. Again, this is typically short term. So I know that water breathe does work for 24 hours and you can have a group, but it's not your natural environment. Typically, you do an undersea expedition for some specific thing, some undersea entrance to some cave complex or something. You can use cool mounts to move underwater, the seahorse, dolphin, shark kind of thing. I have seen people create underwater vessels, submarines type thing. Again, like airships, I would say to use those very cautiously, very specifically, make them super rare to transport the players to some specific undersea location or to get some place that's very difficult to get to. All right, so there you have your assisted travel modes. If you like what you've seen on my channel, please subscribe and please comment. I love to hear comments from people that watch my videos. In the meantime, keep playing D&D, my friends, and tell somebody else about it.